Welcome back to Takacs McGinnis Elder Care Law Hour. I'm Barbara McGinnis, your host, and
we're talking today about advanced care planning and end-of-life decision-making. And today, we're here with the founder of the Vanderbilt Vigil Volunteers program at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Rebecca Hixson. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi.
She is a palliative care nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and also joining her and us today is Matt Frierdich, who is the Palliative Care Chaplain at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. So, Rebecca, let me start with you. You're a palliative care nurse. I always have a problem with the palliative part. At Vanderbilt University Medical Center. What is a palliative care nurse, and what does that involve?
It's a really good question. My role, I'm actually the clinical staff leader, so it's a very interesting role. I get to do about half my time in patient care, and the other half is the same thing as an assistant manager. So I get to spend half my time at the bedside with patients that are either at the end of life, and many of them are just serious illness. They come in for symptom management. They come in with just serious disease processes. I also have the opportunity to be our nurse's greatest advocate as an assistant manager. So.
Okay. And Matt, if I can call you Matt.
Sure.
What does a palliative care chaplain do? Sure. And how do you interact with your patients and families?
Sure. So chaplaincy, hospital chaplaincy in general, is about accompaniment and presence and compassion. And so what we're doing is we're meeting folks where they are in the hospital in order to offer them support and guidance and care that speaks to their spiritual lives, those important stories they tell about who they are and what gives them value and purpose in their life. So specifically in palliative care, chaplaincy really takes on the questions of those existential spiritual questions. Death and dying is sometimes talked about medically only, but really it is an existential and a spiritual crisis. Mm-hmm. These places we've never been before, we're doing things that are foreign and in crisis. And so chaplaincy is about learning what those stories are that people have, the meanings, values, beliefs, and helping support those while they're here.
Is this unique to palliative care, the role of a chaplain? Or, I mean, it sounds like something that certainly would be necessary for patients and their families.
Sure. So it's chaplaincy in the palliative care setting is built in. It's kind of baked into the formula for how you do palliative care well. But it's not unique to the hospital. Chaplains are doing this for lots of people at different points in their life in many ways, but palliative care really comes into focus.
So what is the I described you, Rebecca, as the founder of the Vanderbilt Vigil Volunteers program at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. What is that program? How did it get started? And how are you seeing it impact your patients and their families?
So the Vanderbilt Vigil Volunteer program actually started with about 4 of us. I'm the nursing component. We have our medical director, we have our chaplain, and we also have a chaplain and director of volunteer services. So it's really an interdisciplinary team, which is huge when it comes to palliative care. With the program, we're a hospital. Vanderbilt's a hospital that sees the sickest of the sick, and many times people are brought in from far away from home and far away from their families and their support systems. And sometimes we can locate those and sometimes we can't. And we were seeing a lot of people, as a bedside nurse, I was seeing a lot of people that I was taking care of that didn't have anybody at the bedside, that were not going to leave the hospital. And so we wanted to be able to provide some sort of support when family couldn't be there. Somebody to be a presence, a meaningful presence at the bedside of somebody at the end of life. Something unique to our program as well is that we also have a large population in the palliative care unit that are not quite in the last hours of their life, but they are getting closer, and they're going to be, we're planning to discharge to hospice or somewhere closer to home where they can be more comfortable. In the meantime, all they have is a clock to look at and time to think about what they wish they would have done in their life and what they would like to see for the rest of their life. And so we wanted to be able to provide somebody at the bedside that could be able to be a support and be a listening ear for those people.
So do you have volunteers that actually come to the program and sit with people Is that part of the program?
Absolutely.
The Vigil Volunteers.
Absolutely. That's exactly what they do, and it's so much more than a sitter service. We actually do a full orientation and introduction to what palliative care and what the palliative care unit is, what we do on a regular basis, and the patients that we take care of, so that they are well prepared to not only come in and sit beside somebody, but also to understand where those patients are coming from.
And again, when we train our volunteers, one of the things that we do that I think is really helpful is giving them the emotional and spiritual capacities and kind of talking about what does presence mean, and when we're with someone who's dying, what are the emotional things, what are the things about grief, what are the things about stories and narrative that are so important. And so we don't just equip our volunteers with, again, with training to know kind of recognizing death physiologically, but also to recognize it in a way that speaks to the spiritual, that speaks to what it means to be present with someone.
You know, we have been talking through this program, and we actually haven't talked about the moment of death at all. What happens when someone dies, you know, a patient, I guess they're patients, and when they die, what happens then, and how do you help the family, you know, through that moment of death?
Sure. So in the moments when folks have died and we're surrounding the family, it's very different. Each person is on their own journey, and it looks different depending on the stories that they've brought into the room, depending on the people they've been surrounded with. But I think what our team does best is during the time when they're there, we are learning about them. We're kind of figuring out what is important to them, what do they want this moment to look like. And we've been talking about advanced care planning, and in this moment, and when we're here, it's kind of this sacred moment of almost a quietness that comes into the room, of real reverence. It feels heavy with meaning, not heavy in a necessarily somber way, but just rich with meaning and tears and sadness and all the things in between.
So one of the things I'm sure people fear about dying is dying alone. So how many people have been helped so far by your volunteer vigils, and how do you see it growing?
So that's a really good question. We've had about 30 plus people in the past 6 or 7 months that have really benefited and have had somebody at the bedside with them. We started the program specifically on the palliative care unit to really see how it was going to look on a bigger scale when we opened it to the rest of the hospital. We recently opened it to the medical ICU, which is pretty much our sister unit, but is a much bigger playing field. And we have so many people that want to volunteer. This is a much larger base for them to cover. We are slowly rolling it out to the rest of the hospital, so more and more people are benefiting from this.
Go ahead.
Well, you know,
Barbara's full of, we're full of questions.
We're full of questions. It's a very interesting program. Innovative in the sense that, are you the second hospital in the nation that's come up with this vigil program? I read something about a hospital in Oregon that was the pilot.
Sure. So there's actually lots of folks that do things that are very similar. One of the places we learned a lot from was in Oregon, the No One Dies Alone program, and that's actually a program that has been very well tread throughout lots of hospitals.
Okay.
The one thing that we recognized when we were learning from them was that our patient population, we have a lot of folks coming from far distances. We have families that are stretched thin. As Vanderbilt expands its network of who it cares for, we have families that drive 3, 4, 5 hours to get to the hospital, and that's a financial burden.
Right.
That is an emotional, physical burden. And so offering this program as a gap is to say, hey, we can help meet this gap to be with your loved ones when you can't be.
Right.
That helps a lot. And that's one thing that's a little different than some of these other programs that are actually quite plentiful around the country, these No One Dies Alone programs.
So just before we take a break, let me ask you about, we've talked about like the success stories perhaps. What about families that are coming in and maybe are patients that they really haven't talked about advanced care planning and they really don't understand? How do you, and maybe perhaps there's even conflict, how do you resolve those issues or those questions?
That's a very good question in itself. You know, the thing, especially with these people that are benefiting from the volunteers, we really try to focus, when we talk about advanced care planning, we really try and focus our care around the patient and not try and bring the patient to meet our care needs. And so without trying to bring in a lot of legalities, a lot of paperwork, that all can be done later. But we really focus on what is important to you, what does quality of the rest of your life look like, whether that's hours, days, months, or years. And you know, one of the benefits of these programs, and this one in particular, sitting at the bedside, there's somebody that they can talk about that with.
That sounds like a common theme that we've been hearing is, you know, is how to make sure the patient really gets what they want. So I'd like to thank our guests, Rebecca Hixson and Matt Frierdich from the Vanderbilt Vigil's Volunteer Program at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. When we come back, we'll be offering up some practical tips about hospice, about having conversations, advanced care planning, and end-of-life decision making. Stay with us. We'll see you in a bit.